We, after 9 weeks, moving into the 10th, are coming into John chapter 2. How about that? Breakneck speed as we come through the Gospel of John. And we are going to finish out what I have been calling the first week of Jesus' public ministry. I mentioned a little bit last week that last time I taught this, I had the days off just a little bit because I actually started with the day in which John the Baptist spoke about the one who is to come, whose sandals I'm not worthy to untie. But this time I started with the time we actually saw Jesus, counting that as day one. So you have 6 days, 7 days through it, depending on where you count. But last session, we looked at Jesus and Nathanael and Philip. You remember Nathanael, the Israelite, in whom there is no guile. And then I wanted to pick up on verse 51, which we looked at last week. And I want to use that as the springboard then for the new material that we will have for this week. And in verse 51, John chapter 1, verse 51, he saith unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter ye shall see the heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Now, a couple of things that I just want to remind you of. First of all, the pronouns tell the story here. He, that is Jesus, saith unto him, that is Nathanael, Verily, verily, I say unto you, plural. Nathanael either has dual personalities, or this is not directed just towards Nathanael. This is directed towards a group. And though he's saying it to Nathanael, who has given this great testimony, recognition in verse 49, thou art the Son of God, thou art the King of Israel. I think he's saying it through Nathanael, who said thou art the King of Israel, but he's talking to Israel as a whole. And he says, to Israel, I say unto you, I'll stop right there before I tell you what he says. In case you're wondering, well, how do we know it's saying to Israel? It is by the process of deduction that I don't think he's saying it to Albuquerque. The only thing in context that I could go with is he's speaking to the nation here. So to the nation which has its king, and now Nathanael has recognized as its king, and John the Baptist had previously done so, he says, again in verse 51, I say unto you, Israel, hereafter ye, Israel, shall see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So that is not something that we know of that happened to Nathanael. There's no record of that experience, but that is an experience that we expect to see, that we expect Israel to see. And that is this coronation, if you will, of Jesus as Messiah. Now, it speaks here, the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. The Son of Man is a phrase that we'll see a lot of in the Gospel of John, and you see a lot of it in the other Gospels as well. Jesus very often refers to himself as the Son of God. He earlier, of course, was referred to, did I say Son of God? I meant Son of Man. Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man. He earlier was referred to as the Son of God, for example, again in verse 49, Rabbi, thou art the Son of God. Well, are you the Son of God, or are you the Son of Man? I think that, yes, the answer is yes, you got it. I think that what we see if we were to take the time to really divide these out, the Son of God is a title that is used of Jesus, the eternally existent one who has been in heaven. He today is at the right hand of the Father in heaven. So it's kind of a heavenly title, if you will, that's used. Son of Man is referring to the same person, but it is a title that is used when it is in reference or connected to, in some way, the earthly reign. Because what the Son of God does is come to do what Adam, the first man, could not do, and Jesus comes as the Son of Man to accomplish that dominion that is given over the earth. So anytime you see the phrase the Son of Man in the New Testament, then it is a reference to Jesus as the coming reigning Messiah on earth, the physical kingdom. So it's a kingdom kind of title there that is used. So you'll see the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. We don't have enough to go there that I could find any way to say exactly what that means, but I think that is some kind of a picture of glory that the heavens above, if you will, give their stamp of approval upon Jesus as the Son of Man. They're coming and they're going, doing his bidding, providing everything that he needs from heaven. There's his access to heaven, if you will, as he reigns. So we will expect that someday the nation of Israel will see this prophecy really that Jesus gives in verse 51. And maybe we could call this the first prophecy of Jesus. We're going to see the first miracle of Jesus that we call the first miracle of Jesus. And we'll see why we call it that. But we're going to see the first miracle. Maybe this is the first prophecy that the nation of Israel will see the heavens opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. That is, we're going to see his coronation. We're going to see his reign with heaven's stamp of approval on it. Now, that finishes out what is the third day in a row we have seen him. Then we pick up in John chapter 2, and it immediately says, and the third day. Now, if you follow in that context, it'll say, and on this day, and then it says, and the next day, and then at the beginning of verse 43, it says the day following, and then in chapter 2, verse 1, it is the third day. Now, everything that you have no reference point other than to say the third day from the previous day you have. Otherwise, it's just the third day of what? And so the only reference point you've got is we had a day, we had the following day, we had the next day, and then we had the third day. And we've already looked at 3 or 4, again, how you count them, days. So you can't say, if we'd only had 2, then you'd have the first day, the second day, and on the third day. But we've had 3 or 4 days already. So day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, then the third day after that day. So that means we skip 2 days, and then we're on the third day, and we come. That is why, on your outline, I called it the 6th day of the first week of Jesus' ministry. This means that, as we've counted here anyway, day 4 and day 5 are silent days. We're going to find out, as you may already remember from a little bit from last week, Jesus went and found Philip because he was going back to Galilee. And so he's going to spend the next 2 days traveling. There's no record of what happens on the traveling. We don't know if coronavirus kept him, from where he wanted to go or anything like that. But he was traveling on those 2 days. And then in the third day, he ends up in Cana of Galilee. That would be about the right time to go from, let's say, Jericho. We're not exactly, you may remember where that little place was. We talked about it. But somewhere in the Jericho region up to the Cana region. We know where Cana of Galilee is. It is northwest of Nazareth. And I looked it up today, actually, on Google Maps, and to walk it is 25 hours. So break that up into, I'm going to guess 3 days. I'm going to guess that on the third day, somewhere in the day, he arrives at Cana of Galilee. Let's even say maybe it's afternoon, maybe it's getting towards evening. How is this wedding feast going on? I don't know. I've read a lot of stuff. I just am kind of suspicious about it. Some say they were always married on Thursdays. Some say that the wedding feast was a week long. And you just read so much stuff that it's hard to know what is accurate about it. But there's no reason to believe in fact, it would be a little odd to believe he showed up that morning and they're already out of wine. Even Peter said, it's only 9 o'clock in the morning, right? So we're going to assume this is probably later in the day to the evening. So he's had 3 days to travel those 26 hours. And he then, on that third day, there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. That is the form of that verb. The mother of Jesus was already there. So maybe even because on the map, you would almost go to Nazareth first. You could actually skip Nazareth. Maybe Jesus knows she's going to be at the wedding. Maybe, I'm going to guess this is a big wedding, and you'll see why in just a minute. But Jesus maybe goes home, and there's a little note on the refrigerator that says, "Hi, Josh, gone to Cana." Big wedding. And Jesus says, "Okay, let's go on. Let's keep going." And they make their way further up to Cana of Galilee. And so the third day, a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. Now, again, I'm going to assume this is they've gone or skipped Nazareth and going up to Bethsaida, where Philip is from, and Nathanael and the crew there. Going up there, they come through Galilee, through Cana. They stop and say hi to his mother, and the wedding officials say, "Hey, you all come. We're about to have dinner." So that's that the word called is invited, that both Jesus was called, invited, and his disciples to the marriage. Now, the disciples here, as we know, these disciples are Philip, Nathanael, Andrew, and possibly one more. Possibly one more, because we don't know if that one more is Philip on the two that were there, or if that one more maybe would be John or one of the others, as we talked about again last week. So here, there's at least 4 people, and they come up and are in the wedding. Now, I think that it is significant that the Hebrew Scriptures talk a lot in terms of marriage with Israel and God. Israel being the bride, and you've got pictures of it, let's say in the book of Ruth. You've got pictures of it in the Song of Solomon, which is almost completely about Israel as the bride. You've got Hosea. You've got a lot in Isaiah. There's just a whole bunch of stuff about the relationship that Israel has with God that is bridegroom kind of discussion that goes on here. In addition to that, Jesus himself would, later than this, obviously, would come and give several parables about the kingdom that is going to be restored to Israel, that it is like a marriage feast, for example. So I don't think it's just accidental that the first time we see Jesus doing anything, it just so happens to be a wedding. I think that all ties in to the presentation that God is making of his son, of my son is the Son of Man. My son is the one that is going to be the reigning king. And so, no, this is not just accidental here. This is planned by God the Father. So here they are. Now they're at the wedding feast in Cana of Galilee, it says in verse 3. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, they have no wine. Okay, they wanted wine. That, just to make sure you understand, that is, they were in want of wine. That is to say, they ran out of wine. That is to say, there wasn't enough wine. So not just, boy, some wine would be nice, kind of wanted wine, but there was a lack of wine for the marriage. In fact, just for your Greek lesson for tonight, hustereo, I'll get that right. Hustereo is the word. It is unrelated to hysteria. Hysteria is what you can find out when you watch the evening news tonight. But it is unrelated to our word hysteria. It is, however, related to our word yesterday. Yester. Huster. They are related. It has to do with it's gone already. So the word hysteria, they hysteria wine. It might be history. I didn't look that up. It very well could. History and yesterday might be built on the same word. That's a good thought, but I didn't look it up. I would kind of guess, but I don't know. I just know that I did look up hysteria, and that's totally unrelated. If you want to know, hysteria has to do with the uterus. Hysterect, it's all related, and I think it was because women. Never mind. But anyway, that's right. That's the etymology of hysteria and yesterday and probably history. So the word here is, if I can borrow Robin's suggestion here, the word is, hey, the wine is history. This is the problem. The wine is yesterday. There's no wine, and that was really a crisis that comes to the wedding here. And we, especially who are Baptists, if you're Baptist born and Baptist bred, and when you're gone, you'll be Baptist dead. The crisis is there's wine. But for the Jewish people, the crisis is the wine is gone. And I think we do have to put ourselves into a Jewish culture to understand this, because wine in the Jewish culture, both then and now, very much related to life. And the most characteristic toast with wine is l'chaim, right? To life. And so wine, and not only life, but really the very best of what life has to offer. There's twice in the Old Testament, in the book of Joel and the book of Amos, that speaks of the coming millennium, and it describes the millennium in a number of ways in these verses, but one of the descriptions is that the mountains will drop new wine. So the idea of wine, of flowing, the wine is flowing, it is abundant. That is a picture of the millennium, or of the millennial period of the kingdom. So it is a picture of life, it is a picture of abundant life, it is a picture of joy, of fruitfulness. Only, in some places of Scripture you do see this, but I think in our society, speaking as an American, in our society, wine does have the concept of celebration and those kind of things, but it also, we might see someone staggering along the street, at least we used to, we don't use the term anymore, but we might have seen them staggering along the street, and we would have called them a wino. That's right, a wino. So in our society, that's it. Now, I would even say in Jewish society today, in Israeli society today, I'm going not only from my own experience with about 25 trips there, but from what I hear Jewish people say, and that is you very seldom will see anybody drunk in Jewish society. They have their wine, but their wine is very much almost a worship experience, if you will, and a testimony of life. Now, you're going to question that in a moment when you see how much Jesus is going to make, because we've seen Fiddler on the Roof, yes. Okay. But here is this problem they've got. Now, again, from our experience, and I would say our as an American, but even more so our as a Baptist, if you have a Baptist background, that just seems like the weirdest thing. For the first time we see Jesus, he's going to make wine. It almost seems kind of trivial to us. Make water to wine. For some reason, because I'm a Baptist preacher, I guess I think of the joke of the lady who got stopped by the police officer, and she had an open container in her car, and she was a church lady, and the officer said, "Why, that's wine, ma'am." She said, "No, it's water." She said, "No, that's wine." And she took a little taste and said, "Oh, glory, he's done it again." But anyway, Yeah, yes. Wine, I think for the Jewish culture, and again, at some level in our culture, but definitely for the Jewish culture, it was joy, it was abundance, it was blessing, it was the blessing of God. The mountains will drip with sweet wine is the way you would describe the world that provides everything for you. And so this is what's behind it. Now, I think, is it odd to us that the first place he's going to go is a wedding and the first thing he's going to do is turn water to wine? It's odd to us only because we're not coming with all of that Hebrew culture behind it that basically in the Hebrew mind said, someday there's going to be a marriage, and that was a spiritual concept. There's going to be this marriage between country and God. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Someday, Song of Solomon is going to become the fruition, and in that day, we're going to celebrate life, and the picture of that being wine. So, in the Jewish mind, I think, if you're trying to display Jesus as the Son of Man, there is absolutely no better picture that you could give than for Jesus to show up at a wedding and provide the wine. And so that is the really beautiful picture that we have here. And so here it is. They wanted wine. The wine was yesterday. Wine is gone. The mother of Jesus saith unto him, they have no wine. Verse 4 is interesting. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. Now, I read that with the tone probably at which you read it or you expect it. I want to say, first of all, as I've said many, many times, it's very hard to pick up tone from reading words. Secondly, here, not only do we just have words, but we have English words. We have English words that were written in Greek that were probably spoken in Hebrew or Aramaic, perhaps. So we are several generations from the written word, let alone the voice, the tone at which it was given. And I think that we probably read a negative tone that actually doesn't belong there. There are a number of cases, I didn't give examples here, but there are a number of cases in the scriptures where Jesus or someone else refers to someone as woman. Everything I could read, again, I don't, other than getting in a time machine, I don't know that we could ever prove this, but everything I read is that was not a derogatory manner of speaking to a woman. Today, I think almost universally in American society anyway, to look at someone and say, woman, is probably not going to end well. And especially your mother, yeah. Now, if you were maybe in the South or something, it wouldn't be quite as derogatory, though in some places they take this as derogatory, in the Northeast, for example. But if you said ma'am or madame, perhaps, but try to just remove the kind of negative connotations you have with this word, because I don't really think they're there. Now, furthermore, the next part doesn't sound all that great either, does it? What have I to do with thee? Now, Nathan, if you say that to your mother, she is going to be glad that I have the large print Schofield Bible, right? And bop you up across the head, right? What have I to do with thee? And again, I don't think that negative connotation is there. I think that this what have I to do with thee? It appears to be an idiom, a Hebraism, if you will, that once again, those are kind of hard to translate, especially from one language to another and then over time. But there are a number of places we see this in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. We see this phrase at one time, I think, let's see, it's when Jesus casts out the demons that go into the swine, remember? And the demons say something like, what have we to do with thee? It's the same phrase that is used there. And then it's used twice, at least, in the Old Testament. And the exact phrase used in the Septuagint in the Old Testament this number of times. The phrase is actually, what to me and to thee. The problem is we don't know how to translate that. What to me and to thee. Woman, what to me and to thee. So the translators are kind of stuck trying to say, I gotta make something out of this. And again, I think it's a Hebrew idiom that means something. It would probably take us a paragraph to know what it means. And we, unfortunately, I think, don't exactly know what it means. But it appears to be something like, this is none of your business, or it's not my problem, or let's stay out of it. Maybe with a negative tone, or maybe even just a, I'm sorry about that. Too bad we can't help. I don't know where the tone comes. But anyway, what to me and to thee is the words there. And then he follows that up by saying, mine hour is not yet come. What is mine hour? I'm going to go with the establishment of the kingdom. Here's the picture of the marriage and the wine, and it's not time for me to take the throne. And you possibly could go with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, but there's nothing here that would indicate that they're going to kill him if he presents himself as Messiah. That doesn't come till later. In fact, for really the first year at least of his ministry, maybe year and a half, everything is glowing and wonderful. So doesn't seem to be a threat of the crucifixion. The only reason I say you could associate that is, remember, he says to Peter, James, and John in the Garden of Gethsemane, arise, the hour has come. And here he says, mine hour is not yet come. Now, again, I think it is a relation to the hour of the establishment of the kingdom. So, put all that together, and again, we have to connect some dots here, and hopefully we connect them correctly. But it sure looks like Jesus knows that making wine where there is no wine at a wedding is going to be a very clear announcement. And he is not ready, it looks like, for this very clear announcement to be made. But as you look at this, here's Jesus basically again acknowledging, if I fix the wine problem, then I reveal my identity. And really, maybe we've had twice in chapter 1 already where his identity was revealed. Behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world, or thou art the Son of God, the King of Israel. But that's always somebody else saying it about Jesus. Now this is going to be Jesus saying, I'm he. And are we really ready for this? Is kind of the way I read that. So, mine hour is not yet come. But then look at verse 5. His mother saith unto the servants, whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. Well, she doesn't seem to accept his message. Only way I know how to take that. I don't know. You could run almost anywhere with that. You could say, well, his mother was impatient and disobedient, and she forced him into it. You could say that, again, maybe we're reading kind of a negativity in here that doesn't actually belong in here. And Alex, yes. That's a very good point. She knows. Yeah. Yeah. She doesn't appear to be questioning. She appears to very much know he can do it. And she, of course, was told by the angel Gabriel, as you mentioned, that the government will be upon his shoulders. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. So all that ringing around in her mind. And somehow, some way, she is saying, whether you think your hour is not yet come or not, I'm telling you, fix this problem. I don't know if that's just in the way only a mother can do, or what exactly this is. But she does, again, come in verse 5 and says, whatever you say, do it. Two things that I think are interesting here One is that they're a little trivia pursuit, if you will, but interesting nonetheless. Mary, the mother of Jesus, her name is never used in the Gospel of John. It's always the mother of Jesus. I don't know why. I can't tell you if there's any meaning to that at all, but if anybody asks you what gospel never uses the name of the mother of Jesus, now you know. It is the Gospel of John. And so here she comes. The second thing is these are the last recorded words of Jesus. Excuse me, of Mary, not of Jesus at all. The last recorded words of Mary. We're going to see her all the way through to the cross and even beyond, but she never says anything that is recorded. And for that matter, she doesn't say much through. There's very few things. Behold the bondslave of the Lord, let it be done unto me as thou hast spoken, you remember. And do what he tells you to do. That's basically all of Mary's recorded words in one lesson. No, that's a very good point. She certainly doesn't, she doesn't slap him and wash his mouth out with soap. Say, how dare you talk to me like that? So it is a good point that, again, whatever offense we're reading into it on her behalf, she's not reading it there. She's not experiencing that herself. So I think that's a matter of our eisegesis, if you will, and bringing that in. Oh, that's a good point. You can read it as not so much a pushy, I'm not going to listen to you, but rather okay, you're in charge, whatever he says, and read it that way. It was a very good point there as well. So, no, I think it could. The Greek could sustain the translation, woman, what does this have to do with me? It does sound much sweeter, doesn't it? And then she says whatever he says. And she kind of takes herself out of the picture, and somewhat literally, takes herself out of the picture.
At this point, we don't know that they've run out of wine or they just didn't have any wine, do we?
That's true. I gave the picture as if they ran out, but maybe they never had any. Oh, yes, you're right. It's better wine, so you had to have had wine. They had...
That's how we know.
That later on in the story, it's going to finish that.
Well, here in this translation, Schofield says, when they wanted wine, the mother didn't...
You're right. At the beginning of the story,
there is no wine. They have no wine. That's what it says.
Yeah. You're right. She says they have no wine.
Mine says, and the wine ran out. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to them, they have no wine.
And that would be accurate in the fuller context that it had run out. But good point there, David.
I made a good point.
You did, yes. You get 2 points, David. Yes, Alex.
Can we say there was a lot of winos at that wedding?
There were a lot of winos at this wedding, yes, they were. But you don't get 2 points for that. Moving on to verse 6. By the way, Jesus is going to, in 7 and 8, we'll get there, Jesus is going to give them some instructions, but verse 6 is a little narration. It says that there were set there 6 water pots of stone after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Now, water pots of stone. It was stone water pots that were kosher. A wooden pot or even a leather pot could receive uncleanness from something that touches it, but under the law, that of stone was used for purification purposes. Stone was kosher. And so it's, in fact, it does clearly say here that they were stone after the manner of the purification of the Jews. That is, that these really were for purification. Even, again, unto this day, when you go to Israel with me, you'll find at the entrance to the dining room, there will always be a little, kind of, I would say about a 6-foot sink area that will have 2 or 3 or 4 nozzles to get some water out of, but then there's some pitchers there that always have two handles on them, and one for the dirty hand and then one for the clean hand. So you would take it, you would purify one hand, and then with your clean hand, you're able to take the other and purify both hands. There's no soap there. It's not to wash your hands before dinner. It's completely a purification rite that is done. And so here to have these 6 stone pitchers. Now, these are too big, as you'll see in a moment, to do that there, but they do hold the water for those purification purposes. So, looks to me like we've got a very kosher family here in these 6 pots of stone after the manner of purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. You know, I never thought as a Baptist pastor I would be studying firkins, but I did study firkins to see how much is a firkin, and a firkin is a quarter of a barrel. And a barrel, I looked this up on the Oxford English Dictionary, plus another website I've given you here. A barrel is, as you would expect, a barrel of wine. I really didn't know, because I am pure as the driven snow, that there were specific measurements that have to do with alcohol that you don't use for other issues. In fact, wine is measured differently from beer. I've been studying this, and a barrel is actually a specific measurement, and a firkin is a specific measurement of a barrel. It is a quarter of a barrel. So we've got, with 6 pots, we've got 2 to 3 firkins apiece. That's 12 to 18 firkins total. And 12 to 18 firkins is 3 to 4.5 barrels of wine. Now, I don't know how big their bottles were, or how they bottled their wine, but I did look in modern terminology and found out that that is somewhere between 900 and 1,350 modern bottles of wine. That's a big wedding, I think. It's also a very expensive wedding. Now, I don't know that they drank it all. Cana is... I'm going to guess, the question is how many people lived in Cana. I don't think enough to drink 1,350 bottles of wine at the wedding. There were people from out of town, Jesus obviously and Mary, but so it could have been a big crowd. And honestly, I don't have any idea how many people a bottle of wine serves. I don't know. I just remember years and years ago when I was in high school, and we would always go to Rancho de Chimayo to eat, and Mrs. Jaramillo there knew my dad because he was the pastor in Espanola, you know, and so at Christmas time when she came out and presented him with a bottle of wine, we were all so that's my experience with wine, is that Baptist preachers don't know what to do with it, but nonetheless. Now when I go, she gives me their tea, which is very good, by the way. You should try some. Anyway, back to the story.
Your American standard is
20 to 30 gallons. I think that's actually a little on the low side. Each. So 150 gallons up to 150 gallons. The point being, that's a lot of wine. And probably more wine, we hope, than they drank that weekend. Or maybe Alex is right that there were a bunch of winos there. But I think the point being, wine is a picture of life, even of abundant life. Marriage is a picture of the kingdom. And the ultimate idea here is, better than you could ever even imagine, he is coming and he is presenting himself as the one who can provide. So I think as you read this, take out any negative connotation you might have ever had, or any even kind of random connotation that, well, it's sort of random that he's got a wedding and he's making wine and that's the first introduction. There's nothing random and there's nothing negative about this. This is so perfect for the introduction of Jesus as the coming king, as the Messiah. And so here is this huge bounty of wine. And then in verse 7, Jesus said unto them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. Now, if we're correct, and I think we are, that this is a picture, a foretaste, if you will, of the establishment of the kingdom, I think it's also important to understand that how, there's this picture going all the way through. How are they going to receive the kingdom? They are going to do what he says. Remember, that's what Mary said. Do what he says. And then they're going to work. That's what we looked at in those 7 churches as we saw 2 of them on Sunday. You know, overcome, and I know the work that you do and your patience and all that. So they're going to take his commands and do his commands, and that's going to be the precursor into the kingdom that comes here. Now, obviously, if you don't read that in typology, then you say, preacher, you're just reading a whole bunch of stuff on that one. But I think if you don't read the typology in it, then you're probably just saying that was a little random and he probably should have chosen something better to do as his introduction of himself rather than make wine. So here's this picture of the kingdom. Here's this picture of obedience. Even Jesus said at the what we call the Great Commission today, remember he said to the 11, go and make disciples, baptizing, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. So here's this instruction, teaching or doing all things that I have commanded them to do. I'm sorry?
You said observe.
Teaching them to observe or obey. I sometimes get my old NASB brain mixed in with my King James Version brain. So probably one of each. When it's on the Great Commission era. Okay, so they are going to do this. Now, again, the count could go a couple of different ways, but I like to count the way I've done it this way better than the way I did it the last time. And here it is, the 6th day, and Jesus is at the end of the 6th day giving, again, I'm assuming it's getting towards evening. He's giving them this great blessing, and actually, you know, let's assume they're going to have dinner at 6 o'clock. So that is, they're having dinner on the 7th day. That's when finally we sit down. We've had days of silence. We've had days of hard work, and now the kingdom is arriving. Just a lot of, again, typology that I think we see here. Verses 8, 9, and 10 are, again, kind of narrative. He saith unto them, draw out now and bear unto the governor of the feast, and they bear it. And the ruler of the feast, same word as governor there, by the way, the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants which drew the water knew. And the governor of the feast called the bridegroom, and saith unto him, every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. So here it is, save the best to last, and that's the picture that is given. Now, one more word I want to give in verse 11, and then we'll stop. This is the writer of the gospel that comes and says, this beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. Remember, even several times in chapter 1, we saw in the presentations of Jesus by others like John the Baptist and Nathaniel, we saw that the purpose of the Gospel of John is to get us to see that this is Jesus, Messiah, King of Israel. And here John says, this beginning of miracles. So that's why we call it his first miracle. It's the beginning of miracles. And in the Gospel of John, there are going to be 8 miracles that are going to be given. He did a lot more than 8 miracles, but the Gospel writer chooses these 8 because all 8 of them are going to be very filled with this kind of deep message to them that shows to Israel Jesus as her king. and all of them are going to have both this messianic and this kingdom-related picture that's given. And so he manifested his glory. Again, let me just say, from without the Jewish background, we kind of see this as, could I even say maybe sort of a petty kind of a miracle? Do something bigger than that. I mean, make steaks for them or something. And yet, the scripture says this is how he manifested his glory. That is, made his glory visible. And his disciples, it says, believed on him with this, which once again is the purpose. So right from the beginning, his disciples are saying, look, this guy is the king of Israel. We've said it. Now we've seen it. You're not going to get us away from believing this. We're with him. And that is the picture. And I will stop right there, but I will entertain a question or two if anyone's got any.
Since it was a wedding feast, it could have gone all week.
Yeah,
That's how they ran out of wine. Just like the last week, Jesus' life, how everything built up to.
It is a very good point. That very unlikely that their weddings were a day like our weddings or an evening like our wedding. In our weddings, I guess you could run out of wine. I don't know. I was just glad I was a Baptist preacher. It made the wedding much, much cheaper. But
You run over the time again, because it seems like we're 1 minute we're with John in some place called
Jarrett?
Bethabara,
that's it.
Jordan, and then that's day 2, I guess, and then day 3 we're at Cana.
Actually, not quite. Yeah. So day 1, we're with John, and he presents Jesus and has the baptism. Or maybe the baptism is day 2, but he introduces Jesus anyway. Day 2 is...
That's the day that John sees Jesus, day 2.
That John sees Jesus and I think baptizes him. I don't have it open here. Day 3, end of day 2 is when they come and say, where are you staying, if I'm not mistaken? Yes, we want to know where you're staying, the 2 disciples that came. Day 3, he finds Philip, and Nathaniel says we're going. And then days 4, 5, and 6, day 6 is actually John chapter 2, verse 1, the third day from the previous day. Exactly. You got
another quick question. Jesus is what I've been reading the Old Testament lately, which I'm finding fascinating for the first time, and I'm in the middle of Leviticus, and it's after the building of the temple, which really fascinated me. I used to find it boring, but this is fascinating. And then how they dealt with holiness. So here we have Jesus entering the world, coming to a wedding. I mean, what's the rule? That holiness touches holiness, it's holy. But if unholiness touches, I forget the rule. But doesn't he turn everything into holiness just by touching the wine and by touching the pots? And I mean, you brought it up when you talked about purification.
Yeah, I did that. Purification goes only one way.
I'm just wondering how Jesus is going to pass through the world, and he is the Holy of Holies. How is that interaction happening? I mean, that fascinates me. I don't know if you have an answer.
It is fascinating, and no, I don't have an ansser.
I have a question there. It just seems like I've never been alerted to the fact that Jesus, as the purest I'm just reading in the Old Testament, how he's so careful, about how these priests, their garments, everything had to be just perfect. And here we have God himself in the flesh, walking amongst us, the Holy of Holies himself, interacting with the world. And I remember something about how holiness turns something which isn't holy, but if I can't remember the rule, but there's something about
there is, and
when did we read that?
it was within the last several months we talked about that, and I'm trying to remember let's see. Do you think that because of something that you're holy is the
It was a parable, wasn't it?
it was in the parables, yes. So it would have been last summer, fall that we looked at that. And not only is Jesus perfectly pure, but here he's manifesting his glory, he says. So it's a full display, really, of Jesus as the Son of Man that's given here. Beautiful stuff. Vincent?
But the people that he was interacting with didn't always see it that way.
They didn't always fully see it. We don't know anything more about the guests. All it says is the disciples believed. It doesn't tell us anything about what the other people thought. But as I hinted at it a little bit ago, for the first year and a half, and for Galilee, which is mostly where he is the next year and a half, the response to him was always positive. It's going to be midway and mostly Judea, which is southern Jerusalem area, that we're going to have the negative. And for the most part, the people that we see who are negative in Galilee are going to have made the journey from Jerusalem. They're going to come up, we've heard about this guy. Who is this guy? They're the skeptics, while those who lived with him in Galilee and saw so many of his miracles and teachings, I think that, this is probably not the best way to say it, but the dominoes fall pretty quick. They just say, there's way too much evidence here. He is the one. And I think you see that even at the crucifixion or the last week of Jesus' life, with Palm Sunday, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and Friday of give us Barabbas and crucify Jesus. I think you've got two different crowds there. One, the Galilee crowd, two, the Jerusalem crowd. So,
But Nazareth, they don't recognize him. Nazareth.
you're right. Good point. Nazareth, which would come shortly after this, they're going to say, no, thank you.
That's Joseph's son.
That's Joseph's son. That's right. And that's all.
Does everybody notice that we don't know anything about what's happened in the first 30 years of his life? He just shows up and makes a miracle.
That's right. And the only thing that John really has skipped, he skipped his birth, of course, but in the other Gospels, the only thing we have is his birth and 2 little verses or 3 little verses about when he was 12 years old teaching in the temple. And outside of that, the entire period is silent.
Who do you think he's writing for, John? Who's he writing this gospel for?
I think the gospel is written for Jews of the diaspora, and he knows that other people are going to be looking on. He knows that Jesus, by the time the writer has come to it here, I think he knows that Jesus has become a pretty popular fellow, and so that Gentiles are going to read it also. But his purpose is to convince the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah, is my belief. Well, let me lead us in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to be here tonight together to study this beautiful and rich miracle. And even though the promises aren't directly related to us, we know that the day is coming when the Son of Man will reign here upon this earth and the mountains will drop sweet wine. And we look forward to that beautiful day in which all things are put under his feet, and ultimately the day in which even the last enemy of death is defeated, and this earth is offered up once again as very good to God the Father. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. You all be safe. Have a good evening.